Yeah, so tell me something about grip, Andy.
Alright, so when you start off, for a forehand, you obviously need to figure out how to grip the disc. And a lot of people feel like they need to spread their fingers wide to sort of stabilize the disc and make sure you're actually holding it straight and flat when you're about to throw. But the way to actually compensate for that and to make sure you're holding the disc well is to grip it really well back by your thumb, and then you can put two fingers right along the rim, so you get a whole lot more power like that. Come flick through, and you'll get a lot more spin, a lot more power, and that's all you need to throw a forehand properly.
And what about the two fingers that you have not on the disc, Andy?
And so, some people try different amounts of fingers and different spraying them, but you can keep these two right up. So it's pretty much like that.
Right, okay.
You're holding it really tightly in this part, these two fingers out of the way, and these ones right along the disc, right along the rim.
Right, cool. My forehand grip is very similar to Andy's. My first two fingers rest snugly up against the inside of the rim. The disc is nice and snug in between my fingers and my thumb helps by holding onto the top of the disc. Where my grip differs from Andy's is that I actually place my third finger on the edge of the disc. And I've found, especially when it's windy, that this helps stabilize the disc as I bring it back before I make my throw. Basic mechanics. This is going to be divided into three sections, guys. Pivoting and where you place your plant foot, your right leg and the arm motion that you make with your throwing arm, and shoulders and hips. Pivot and plant foot. Brennan, Aaron and Andy all step sideways and not forward when they want to make their forehand throw, and all three of them have their plant foot, their right foot, facing perpendicular to the target. Very clearly seen here with Andy as he places his foot, it's perpendicular to where he's wanting to throw. Does not face the target, and this will become important when we talk about the next part. Right leg and right arm. Now we spoke about the fact that all three of these guys throw with their plant foot perpendicular to the target, and here you can see as Aaron's foot is perpendicular to the target, that's allowing his leg to get out of the way and his arm to throw in front of his right leg. And Andy will be the same, throwing in front of his leg because his plant foot is perpendicular to the target, allowing his knee to get out of the way. And his arm motion is very much a downward motion, as you can see there, not a forward motion. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the piece. Quick recap then. These three guys, they're all stepping sideways to make their throw, not forward. Their foot's perpendicular to the target, allowing their leg to get out of the way, throwing inside their leg with their throw arm, and in a downward motion, not forward. Hips and shoulders. All three guys really throw with their hips and shoulders facing the target, and especially their shoulders. And this really helps with a few things. First, it helps with accuracy. Facing the target help you be a lot more accurate. Helps with power, you can generate more power as well. And it also really helps keep the disc flat or inside out. If you close your shoulders off to the target, you'll really find that you have trouble with your disc turning over. And so a quick recap here, we can see with Andy, plant foot out perpendicular, leg out of the way, arm nice downward motion in front of his leg, and his hips and his shoulders open to the target. We've spoken in basic mechanics about the arm motion in that it's very much a downward motion when you throw your forehand rather than a forward motion. In this section we're really going to isolate the arm, throwing through your shoulder, your elbow and your wrist, and we've got an exercise here that will help you in that. So we're trying to get away from the idea of throwing forward with your arm and really pushing that arm down. Andy and Brennan are about to show you an exercise to try to promote both independence in your arm from your body, something that we sometimes see as a problem with people who are learning to throw forehand. They get their arm a little bit caught in their body, in their action. And secondly, very much promoting the motion that your arm is moving in a downward motion when you release the disc, rather than a lot of people coming to Frisbee from playing a ball sport feel that when they release their forehand, their arm should be coming through. The problem with that is a lot of the time, if your arm is coming through and forward, it's very hard to keep your wrist open at the end of that motion. It's far more common for your wrist to come across, which of course will promote your disc turning over when you make your throw. They're going to be throwing outside in or roll curve. This is a very important throw to have, but this exercise is purely just to get you moving your arm independently, your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist from your body, and promoting that very much downward motion with the flip. So here we see Brendan throwing roll curve, and what we can really see from him here is his arm independent from his body and really pushing it down. And what I really like about Andy's throw, guys, is he's got a lovely relaxed arm. Again, it's independent from his body, very much a downward motion, but a nice relaxed motion with his roll curve and a nice strong flick. A good tip to gauge how well you're doing with this drill is what happens to the disc when it lands on the ground. So if it keeps rolling away from you, you'll know that you're not getting much zip on the disc and that your arm is probably moving forward rather than down. But if you get a good strong zip on the disc, you'll see that when the disc lands, instead of rolling away, it will stop quite quickly and in a much smaller area. So instead of rolling all the way out to the left, it just stops within about 6 feet of landing. And what you see with that throw is that my arm motion again is very much down and not forward. And once you're getting happier with this roll curve, you're really getting good strong zip on the disc. When the disc lands, it's not running away from you, it's landing smoothly and stopping quickly. Then you can really start to try to also flatten the disc out in its flight. And you should be able to do this just by lowering the release. So in this next throw, going to be a nice flat trajectory, a slightly lower release of the disc. And once you're getting happier doing this, you can also of course try to get inside out. Again, just a slightly lower release again, bit of a tweak in the wrist. And there you go, disc starting to move from my right to left, inside out. Just as we isolated the arm in the last section of the video, what we're going to try to do here is isolate the stance. It can be a lot to think about when you're learning to throw forehand, where your foot should be planted, what your arm should be doing, your hips and your shoulders. Very, very important, the balance when you throw. And so this next section is just going to try to introduce an exercise that makes the stance a little bit simpler, so you can really work on it without having to think too much about it. This exercise just seeks to simplify what you're trying to do. Instead of making a big step to the side, make sure that your feet are in the correct position before you make a throw. Stand behind a line, make sure that your plant foot is perpendicular to the target, and then start throwing. From here, you can make your stance wider and wider. My plant foot is still perpendicular to the target, my arm is still throwing inside my leg, and as you can see here, my shoulders are still nice and open to the target. Also really important, even when my stance is getting wider and wider, you want to be very, very balanced when you throw. And so at the end of your throw, you should be in a nice, strong, balanced position. What the exercise is trying to do, therefore, is just decrease the number of things that are going through your head so that you can get the mechanics right and make a good strong throw. Where a lot of these good strong mechanics will help you is once you start throwing onto the break side. So throwing down the field, as you can see here, standing behind the white line, foot coming sideways instead of forward, throwing with my arm inside my knee, will also really help when I start throwing onto the break side. And the only thing that changes is the angle of attack. So you can see the black line here is what I'm going to be throwing behind, my foot perpendicular to the target. But there's no difference in the action that I'm making. Still throwing in a downward motion inside my leg, balanced, hips and shoulders open to the target. And this video just seeks to show that this possibly the simplest way to think about throwing down the field or throwing out to the break side is that perpendicular plant foot. So throwing down the field, my foot is perpendicular to the target there. I've stepped sideways. Well, I'm still stepping sideways to throw break side, but of course to be perpendicular my foot will have to come forward a bit. But the action of the throw itself, exactly the same. In this troubleshooting section, we're going to try to highlight some of the issues that we see with people trying to learn to throw forehand. And if you find yourself with one of these problems, why we think it's a problem and what you might be able to do to solve it. The first issue we're going to look at is your plant foot facing the target rather than being perpendicular to it when you throw. Two main problems with this. The first of them is that your leg will hinder your arm if your foot is facing the target when you step sideways. So there you can see my knee comes forward rather than sideways, and that starts to hinder my arm motion when I make the throw. The second problem with having your plant foot facing forward rather than perpendicular to the target when you make the throw is that you can't throw with your arm inside your leg as your knee is in the way. As a result of that, you have to come a long way across to make that low release throw, as of course your leg is in the way of your arm. A further problem having your plant foot facing forward, not sideways, is that having to come across so far to make that low release throw, if you cannot make that throw, you then have to come all the way across to make a backhand throw. Whereas if you have your plant foot facing perpendicular to the target and throwing with your arm inside your leg, you're in a much more balanced position with less weight across your body to come back to make that backhand throw. The next issue we're going to look at is people stepping forward and not sideways when they throw. A lot of the time this happens when it's windy. Beginner throwers feel that getting closer to the target might help them in their throw. Stepping forwards and not sideways will affect your hips. Instead of being open to the target, your hips will be facing out onto the break side somewhere when you throw. As a result, you're going to have to compensate with your shoulders, and you're not going to be as balanced or be able to throw with as much power. The second problem can be trying to throw the disc too hard. What usually happens here is that your arm comes too far through and forward rather than a nice early release with a downward motion. And what usually happens with this is that the disc rolls over rather than releasing inside out and staying nice and flat. Another problem we sometimes see is your pivot foot turning and facing your plant foot when you throw. So what you can see with Aaron here is that his pivot foot has very much turned and faced his plant foot when he throws. One of the main problems here, of course, is that he is losing a lot of balance and he's really struggling to stay in a balanced position when he throws, if this occurs. The second problem of having your pivot foot facing your plant foot is that your shoulders will get closed off to the turn as your hips and shoulders face away from where you're throwing. Now what Andy's doing here is giving you a really good visual aid. By placing your non-throwing arm in line with your shoulders when you throw, you'll automatically get a guide of are your shoulders and hips open to the target when you release the disc. And as you can see here, Andy's non-throwing arm is facing down the field instead of open to the target. And so by changing this, which Andy will now start to do, by pulling your arm back across you, keeping your shoulders nice and open to the target, In fact, you have a much stronger, more balanced position when you throw. And as we've talked about previously, this will help you with accuracy and power, and also importantly, keeping the disc flat inside out rather than having it turn over when you throw it. Finally, remember somebody has to catch the disc. You might think you're throwing great throws, nice low release, good strong zip on the disc, but remember, if you're throwing it really low or if you're throwing it really hard at someone, well, they actually have to catch it as well. So a quick recap with Aaron here. Standing behind a line is a really good visual to make sure you are stepping sideways when you throw. Plant foot, perpendicular to the target, gets your knee out of the way. Your arm motion, a nice strong downward motion with your arm. Hips and shoulders nice and open to the target. Good, strong, balanced position.